November 1917, London, choked in wartime fog and fear. Inside a dimly lit Treasury office, Sir George Paish, one of Britain's most respected financial minds, studies a classified report that makes his hands tremble. The British Empire, ruler of a quarter of the world, is bankrupt. Not hypothetically, not in the future. Now, today. They have gold for only 6 more weeks of war. Their factories stand silent without American coal. Their armies will soon starve without American wheat. Their government remains afloat only because one New York banking house, J.P. Morgan and Company, keeps signing lifelines across the Atlantic. Paish whispers the words no British official has dared speak aloud. We are no longer financing the Americans. They are financing us. He understands the truth before the politicians do. The war has already created a new empire, and it is not the British one. It is American, built not with armies, but with credit. The greatest transfer of power in modern history is happening in ledgers, not on battlefields, and almost nobody sees it coming. August 1914. The lights are going out all over Europe, but the financial establishment believes they understand how this war will work. They have fought wars before. They know the rules. London is the center of the financial universe. The pound sterling is the global reserve currency, and the City of London's banking houses control the arteries of international commerce. Gold flows through London. Credit originates in London. Power resides in London. In Berlin, German economists calculate their war chest with confidence. The Reichsbank holds substantial gold reserves. German industry is the most advanced in Europe. The railways run on time. The army is the finest fighting force the world has ever seen. They can sustain a modern war for years if necessary. In Paris, French financiers reassure their government. France has weathered wars before. They have gold. They have alliances. They have the resources of a global empire spread across 3 continents. And America? America is wealthy, certainly. America has factories and farms and a growing financial sector in New York. But America is provincial. America is a debtor nation that still owes Europe for building its railroads. America has never fought a European war. Wall Street is impressive, yes, but it remains subordinate to the great banking houses of London, Paris, and Berlin. The Europeans invented modern finance. The Americans merely copied it. This is what they believe in, August 1914. They are catastrophically wrong. The war begins, and immediately everything breaks. Within weeks, European governments suspend gold convertibility. Stock exchanges close. Credit freezes. The old rules, the careful mechanisms of the gold standard, the gentlemen's agreements between central banks, the assumption of fiscal prudence, evaporate like morning mist. Then comes the first shock, the cost. This is not warfare as Europe has known it. This is industrial warfare, mechanized warfare, warfare measured not in thousands of shells, but in millions, not in hundreds of casualties, but in hundreds of thousands. The Western Front becomes a meat grinder, powered by steel and chemistry and petroleum, and it devours money at a rate no European treasury has ever imagined. Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, David Lloyd George, reviews the weekly expenditure reports with growing horror. Before the war, the entire British government operated on 200 million annually. Now they are spending $5 million per day. Per day. The numbers seem impossible. They are not impossible. They are real. In Berlin, the situation grows desperate even faster. The British naval blockade strangles German imports. No rubber, no copper, no oil, no food. German planners had prepared for a short war. 6 months, perhaps a year. They had not prepared for this. Nobody had prepared for this. And then the European powers make the calculation that will destroy them. They look across the Atlantic. October 1914. A small group of British officials meets in secret with representatives of J.P. Morgan and Company in New York. The meeting is not publicized. It cannot be publicized. The British government is about to admit something unthinkable. They need American money to continue fighting. This is supposed to be temporary, a bridge loan, a short-term arrangement until Britain mobilizes its full resources. The Morgan bankers nod and smile and agree to help. They understand what the British do not yet grasp. There is no temporary in modern warfare. There is only escalation. Once you accept the first loan, you will need the second, and then the third. And then you will need loans to pay the interest on the previous loans. You will need credits and guarantees and advances. You will need, in the end, everything. The British tell themselves they remain in control. They are the clients, after all. They are the ones with the empire, the navy, the centuries of financial sophistication. The Americans are merely the bankers. Bankers serve. Bankers follow instructions. This is what the British tell themselves as they sign the papers and accept the credits and begin the long, irreversible process of subordination. In Washington, President Woodrow Wilson watches these developments with studied neutrality. America is not at war. America will not take sides. America will remain, in Wilson's words, impartial in thought as well as deed. But American banks are private institutions. If they choose to lend money to Britain and France, well, that is simply business. It has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with choosing sides. This is what Wilson says publicly. Privately, he understands exactly what is happening. The Europeans are transferring their power to Wall Street, one desperate loan at a time. The arithmetic of destruction. By 1915, the war has consumed all pretense of fiscal sustainability. Britain is spending $6 million per day. France is spending nearly as much. The numbers defy comprehension, but the physical reality is even worse. Every minute on the Western Front, thousands of artillery shells arc through the air and explode in trenches and towns and forests. Each shell costs money to manufacture, money to transport, money to fire. The armies need rifles and machine guns and poison gas and barbed wire and boots and uniforms and food and medical supplies and horses and trucks and everything, everything, everything. The British War Office sends urgent cables to the Morgan offices in New York. They need 1,500 tons of steel per week. They need 200,000 barrels of oil per month. They need 3 million pounds of copper. They need locomotives and rail cars and cranes. They need it all, and they need it now, and they cannot pay in gold because they are running out of gold. This is the secret that keeps British officials awake at night. The gold is disappearing. In 1914, the Bank of England held 42 million in gold reserves. By mid-1915, it has fallen below $20 million. Britain is selling its gold to buy American supplies. Britain is selling its investments, railroads in Argentina, mines in South Africa, factories in India, to buy American weapons. Britain is liquidating centuries of accumulated wealth to sustain a few more months of war. Sir George Paish, the man who will later calculate the full scope of Britain's bankruptcy, watches the reserves drain away and sees the future with terrible clarity. Britain is not borrowing from America. Britain is transferring the empire itself to America, one asset at a time. The Morgan machine, J.P. Morgan and Company, does not merely lend money to Britain. In January 1915, Morgan becomes Britain's exclusive purchasing agent in the United States. Every rifle, every shell, every ton of steel that flows from American factories to British ports passes through Morgan's hands. It is the largest concentration of financial and commercial power in history, all controlled by a single banking house. The Morgan offices at 23 Wall Street become a second war ministry. Hundreds of clerks process purchase orders. Accountants track millions of transactions. Agents negotiate with steel mills in Pittsburgh, munitions plants in Connecticut, chemical factories in Delaware. Money flows in from British and French treasuries. Goods flow out to European ports. And with every transaction, Morgan collects its commission. The scale is staggering. In 1915 alone, Morgan processes over $1 billion in Allied purchases, more than the entire federal budget of the United States government. By 1916, the number rises to $3 billion. By 1917, it exceeds $4 billion. One bank, one war, $4 billion. British officials watch this machine operate and feel the first stirrings of genuine fear. They need Morgan. They cannot function without Morgan. Their army depends on Morgan's credit. Their factories depend on Morgan's supply chains. Their government depends on Morgan's willingness to continue advancing loans. The British Empire, which has dominated global commerce for 2 centuries, is now subordinate to a New York bank. And Morgan knows it. The shift, something fundamental, changes in 1916. The numbers tell the story. For the first time in American history, the United States becomes a net creditor nation. For 150 years, America borrowed from Europe to build canals, to lay railroads, to finance expansion. European capital built American industry. European banks financed American growth. This was the natural order. Old money flows to young countries. Investment flows from developed economies to developing ones. In 1916, that order reverses. Europe now owes America. Britain owes billions. France owes billions. Even neutral nations borrow from American banks to buy American goods. The global flow of capital inverts. Money floods into New York from every corner of the earth. Gold arrives in the holds of armored ships, guarded by soldiers, insured at extraordinary cost, transferred from European vaults to American vaults, from old imperial treasuries to new world banks. Wall Street bankers watch the gold pile up in their vaults and understand they are witnessing something unprecedented. This is not just war profits. This is a fundamental realignment of global power. London has been the center of international finance since the Napoleonic Wars. Now, in the space of 2 years, that center is shifting. Currency traders begin quoting prices in dollars instead of pounds. Foreign banks open New York branches. International transactions settle through American clearing houses. The mechanisms of global finance, slowly, then suddenly, reorient around Wall Street. In London, older bankers sense what is happening and feel something like vertigo. They have spent their entire careers at the center of the financial universe. Now the universe has a new center, and it is 3,000 miles away. The German catastrophe. While Britain bleeds gold to stay alive, Germany bleeds differently. The British blockade strangles German trade. Before the war, Germany imported 40% of its food. Now those imports have stopped. Germans begin to starve, not immediately, not obviously, but slowly, relentlessly. As the blockade continues month after month, year after year, the calories diminish. Turnips replace potatoes. Sawdust extends bread flour. Civilians grow thin, then weak, then sick. The Reichsbank prints money to finance the war. Inflation begins to creep upward. Prices rise. Savings erode. The German government issues war bonds and demands citizens buy them. The citizens comply because they are patriotic, because they believe in victory, because they have no choice. They take their savings, the money they have accumulated over lifetimes of work, and exchange it for government paper promising future repayment. It is a promise that will never be kept. German economists watch the money supply expand and calculate, with growing dread, the future consequences. They cannot say this publicly. They cannot admit that Germany is financing the war by destroying its own currency, by borrowing against a future that may not exist, by making promises it cannot keep. But they know. They watch the inflation figures and see Weimar before Weimar exists. They see hyperinflation before it arrives. They see the destruction of middle-class savings, the collapse of social trust, the political chaos that will follow. All of it is visible in the data, if you know how to read it. And across the Atlantic, American factories run 3 shifts a day to meet European demand. The war boom American industrial production in 1917 exceeds the combined output of Britain, France, and Germany. This is not a statistic. This is a fact that reshapes global reality. American steel mills pour more metal than all of Europe. American farms harvest more grain. American factories produce more machinery. The war that is destroying Europe is enriching America at a rate unprecedented in human history. In Pittsburgh, steel mills glow red through the night. Orders pour in faster than factories can fill them. Mill owners expand operations, hire new workers, build new furnaces. The steel goes to shipyards, to munitions plants, to construction sites. Everything requires steel. Everything requires American steel. In the Midwest, farmland under cultivation expands by millions of acres. Wheat exports to Europe triple, then quintuple. American farmers buy new equipment, expand their operations, plant every available acre. European cities are starving. American granaries overflow. The ports, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, operate at maximum capacity. Ships arrive empty and depart loaded with war materials. The docks never stop moving. Longshoremen work around the clock. The shipping lanes across the Atlantic become conveyor belts feeding the European war machine, and every pound of cargo represents American profit. Wall Street orchestrates this boom with cold precision. Banks extend credit to manufacturers. Brokers arrange shipping. Insurers underwrite cargo. The entire apparatus of American capitalism pivots toward war supply, and the money flows back to New York in an ever-rising tide. Stock prices soar. Bond yields tighten. Real estate values climb. New York City experiences a construction boom even as European cities crumble under artillery bombardment. The contrast becomes grotesque. In London, rationing restricts food consumption. In Paris, coal shortages force factories to close during winter. In Berlin, citizens queue for hours to buy turnips. In New York, restaurants serve steak and champagne. Broadway theaters are packed. Department stores report record sales. America is not suffering from the war. America is profiting from the war. Obscenely, undeniably, spectacularly. The Liberty Loans, April 1917. America enters the war, and the nature of American power transforms again. Now it is not just private banks lending to European governments. Now it is the United States government itself, mobilizing American wealth for war, and doing so in a way that will permanently alter American society. The Wilson administration launches the Liberty Loan program, a massive public campaign to sell war bonds to ordinary Americans. The government needs to raise billions of dollars. It does so by convincing millions of Americans, farmers, clerks, factory workers, shopkeepers, to become investors. For most of these people, it is their first experience with financial markets. They have never owned a bond. They have never calculated interest. They have never thought of themselves as participants in high finance. Now they are. Movie stars promote Liberty bonds. Posters appear on every street corner. Schools organize bond drives. Community groups compete to exceed their quotas. The campaign transforms American culture. It creates, for the first time, a truly national investor class. Millions of Americans learn to think in terms of returns, yields, compound interest. They learn to trust financial instruments. They learn to see government bonds as safe, reliable, patriotic investments. This is not merely war financing. This is the creation of modern American capital markets. After the war, these millions of bond investors will become stock investors, mutual fund investors, retirement account holders. They will become the deep, liquid, sophisticated capital markets that will power American growth for the next century. The foundation is being laid right now, in 1917 and 1918, by ordinary Americans buying Liberty bonds to support the war effort. Wall Street understands this immediately. The bankers see a future where American capital markets dwarf European markets, where New York is not just one financial center among many, but the financial center, where the depth and liquidity of American markets give American institutions permanent advantages over foreign competitors. The Liberty Loan Program is not just funding the war, it is building the infrastructure of American financial dominance, the credit empire. By 1918, European governments owe American lenders over $10 billion. To understand the scale, the entire federal budget of the United States in 1914 was $742 million. In 4 years of war, European nations have borrowed more than 10 times the annual budget of the American government. The debts are staggering. They are also irreversible. Britain owes $4.7 billion. France owes $3.4 billion. Italy owes $1.6 billion. The numbers represent not just money, but power. A debtor is not sovereign. A debtor cannot make independent decisions. A debtor must consider the wishes of the creditor. This is basic political economy, and it now applies to the greatest empires on earth. British officials meet in private and discuss their options. They have no good options. They can attempt to repay the debts, which will require decades of austerity and taxation. They can default, which will destroy their credit and isolate them from capital markets. They can negotiate easier terms, which will require them to accommodate American political demands. Every option is bad. Every option represents diminished power. Every option confirms the same truth. Britain is no longer in control of its own destiny. American officials understand this perfectly. They do not need to make threats. They do not need to issue demands. They simply need to exist as creditors, and British behavior changes. When British diplomats negotiate post-war arrangements, they consult with American representatives first. When British officials consider economic policy, they calculate American reactions. The subordination is not formal. It does not appear in any treaty. It is simply the way the world works now. Debtors defer to creditors. This is the law of power. In Paris, French officials experience the same realization. France has been invaded, devastated, bled white by 4 years of warfare. France needs American loans to rebuild. France needs American approval to secure its future. France, which has been a great power since the age of Louis XIV, is now a supplicant. The humiliation is compounded by the fact that few people discuss it openly. The transfer of power happens in private meetings, in quiet negotiations, in the subtle recalibration of diplomatic relationships. The public sees victory parades and peace celebrations. The insiders see debt schedules and repayment terms. The public believes Europe has won the war. The insiders know America has won something far more valuable: Europe's future. New York ascendant. The foreign exchange markets tell the story more clearly than any political analysis. In 1914, 90% of international trade was invoiced in pounds sterling. By 1919, that number has fallen below 50%, and the dollar is rising fast. Currency traders in every financial center watch the shift and adjust their positions accordingly. The pound is weakening, the dollar is strengthening. Capital flows follow these signals. Foreign banks that operated exclusively through London branches now open New York offices. International corporations that held reserves in pounds shift to dollars. Governments that borrowed in sterling now borrow in dollars. The technical mechanisms of global finance, clearing houses, settlement systems, reserve currencies, slowly pivot from London to New York. British bankers watch this happen and understand they are living through the end of an era. For a century, London has been synonymous with international finance. British merchant banks have financed trade routes across the globe. The pound sterling has been the measuring stick of value. British financial institutions have set the standards, made the rules, controlled the flows. Now those institutions are becoming secondary. Now the rules are being made in New York. Now the flows are controlled by Wall Street. Some British bankers are bitter. Some are philosophical. All of them are helpless. They cannot reverse the tide. They cannot restore what has been lost. The war has transferred wealth and power at a scale that cannot be undone by policy or diplomacy or wishful thinking. The numbers are the numbers. The debts are the debts. London will remain an important financial centre, but it will not be the centre. That position now belongs to New York, and it will remain there for the rest of the century and beyond. Act 4. The silent empire of debt, the hidden hierarchy. The Versailles Peace Conference in 1919 is nominally about redrawing borders and establishing the League of Nations and punishing Germany. But in the private meetings, away from the cameras and journalists, the real negotiations concern money. European nations need American loans to rebuild. They need debt relief to avoid bankruptcy. They need financial arrangements that will allow them to function as governments. The Americans hold all the leverage, and they use it carefully. They do not need to be aggressive. They do not need to humiliate their allies. They simply need to be present, and their presence changes the conversation. When British representatives propose a diplomatic arrangement, American representatives ask, how will this affect debt repayment? When French officials suggest a territorial settlement, American officials inquire, does this compromise France's ability to service its obligations? The questions do not need to be threatening. They are simply questions, but they establish hierarchy. They make clear who depends on whom. British Prime Minister David Lloyd George understands this perfectly. In private correspondence, he admits what cannot be said publicly. We are in the hands of our creditor. France's Georges Clemenceau is equally blunt. We won the war, but lost the peace, because we lost control of our finances. These are not the words of victorious leaders. These are the words of men who recognize they have been checkmated by their own desperation. The German reparations arrangements illuminate the new order most starkly. Germany must pay massive reparations to France and Britain, but Germany is bankrupt. How will Germany pay? Through American loans. American banks will lend money to Germany. Germany will use that money to pay reparations to France and Britain, and France and Britain will use those reparations to repay their debts to America. It is a circular flow, and at the center of the circle sits Wall Street, collecting interest at every stage. The arrangement is absurd, unsustainable, destined to fail catastrophically, but that failure is years away. For now, it serves American purposes. It keeps European nations dependent. It ensures American banks remain essential to European recovery. It cements American financial power. The gold transfer. The physical movement of gold from Europe to America during and after the war represents the largest transfer of monetary wealth in modern history. By 1920, the United States holds nearly half of the world's gold reserves. Nearly half. The gold sits in vaults at the New York Federal Reserve, at Fort Knox, at private banks. Tons and tons of gold, shipped across the Atlantic on armed vessels, transferred from European treasuries that could not pay their bills to American vaults overflowing with wealth. This gold is not simply a commodity. Gold is the foundation of the monetary system. Under the gold standard, a nation's ability to issue currency, to conduct international trade, to maintain economic stability, depends on its gold reserves. For centuries, European nations, particularly Britain, accumulated gold to support their imperial ambitions. Now that gold has moved, it has moved to America, and with it has moved the capacity for monetary leadership. American officials understand exactly what this means. The United States can now influence global monetary policy. The United States can expand credit when it wishes and contract credit when necessary. The United States can set interest rates that affect the entire world. The United States has become, in the precise technical sense, the center of the international monetary system, not through conquest, not through colonization, through debt and credit and the patient accumulation of gold. In London, Older Treasury officials sometimes walk past the Bank of England and think about the gold that used to sit in those vaults. The gold that financed the Napoleonic Wars, that backed the expansion of the British Empire, that made London the financial capital of the world. That gold is gone now. It is in New York, and it is not coming back. The dollar's quiet rise. The path to reserve currency status is not announced. There is no formal ceremony where the pound sterling steps down and the dollar takes over. The transition happens through a million small decisions made by banks and corporations and governments around the world. They decide to hold more dollar reserves. They decide to invoice in dollars. They decide to borrow in dollars. Each individual decision is rational, driven by the logic of power and profit. Collectively, these decisions transform the global monetary order. By 1925, the dollar is used in roughly 25% of international transactions, up from virtually zero in 1914. This is not yet dominance. The pound still leads, but the trajectory is clear. The dollar is rising. The dollar is liquid. The dollar is backed by the world's largest economy and the world's largest gold reserves. The dollar is, increasingly, the currency that matters. Foreign exchange traders understand this faster than politicians. Currency is their business. They watch the flows, calculate the odds, place their bets. They see the dollar appreciating against European currencies. They see American banks offering better terms than British banks. They see American capital markets deeper and more liquid than European markets. They adjust their behavior accordingly. They hold more dollars. They recommend dollars to their clients. They accelerate the very trend they are observing. This is how reserve currencies emerge, not through government decree, but through market recognition. Traders and banks and corporations gradually acknowledge a new reality, and their acknowledgement makes that reality more real. The dollar becomes a reserve currency because people treat it as a reserve currency, and people treat it as a reserve currency because American power makes it the safest, most useful store of value in an uncertain world. The British pound will remain important for decades, but its dominance is over. The era of sterling hegemony has ended, and the era of dollar hegemony has begun. World War I did not cause this transition overnight, but it compressed into 4 years a shift that might otherwise have taken 50. The question nobody asks. In the euphoria of victory, few people in America or Europe stop to ask a simple question. Who actually won the war? The answer seems obvious. The Allies won. Germany lost. The maps change. The treaties are signed. The soldiers come home. This is victory. But look at the balance sheets. Look at the debt. Look at the power relationships. Europe is devastated. Tens of millions dead. Cities destroyed. Economies shattered. Treasuries bankrupt. Populations traumatized. Governments dependent on American credit. Industries reliant on American supplies. Currencies backed by American gold. This is what victory looks like for Europe, survival purchased through subordination. America, meanwhile, is untouched. No battles on American soil, no cities bombed, no factories destroyed. Instead, factories expanded, farms enlarged, ports upgraded, infrastructure improved, gold reserves multiplied, banks empowered, currency rising, population optimistic. This is what neutrality, then late entry, looks like. All the benefits of victory, with none of the costs of war. The soldiers who fought on the Western Front won the war. The bankers who stayed in New York won the peace. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is accounting. The numbers tell the story more clearly than any political narrative. The war transferred wealth and power from Europe to America on a scale without historical precedent. The transfer was not accidental. It was the predictable result of Europe's financial desperation and America's willingness to lend at interest. Some European officials understand this and feel betrayed. They remember American protestations of neutrality in 1914, American claims of selfless assistance in 1917, American declarations of democratic principle at Versailles. They compare those noble words to the hard reality of debt schedules and repayment terms and find the contrast bitter. America claims to have saved Europe. Europe feels it has been bought. Both perspectives are true. America did provide the resources that allowed the Allies to win. America also charged for those resources and extracted in return a level of influence that no military conquest could have achieved. The modern American empire was born in this paradox, help freely given that comes with inescapable strings attached. Epilogue: the empire that dare not speak its name. Modern Americans rarely think of their country as an empire. Empire is what other nations had. Britain with its colonies, France with its territories, Rome with its provinces. America has allies, trading partners, friends. America spreads democracy and free markets. America does not conquer and rule. This is technically true. America does not have colonies. But America has something more effective: a global financial system that requires dollars, a trade system denominated in dollars, a monetary system backed by dollars, a debt market centered in dollars. Every central bank in the world holds dollars. Every major transaction involves dollars. Every nation that wants to participate in global commerce must have access to dollars. This is power without occupation. This is empire without colonies. This is dominance without the crude mechanisms of territorial control. It is more subtle than the British Empire. It is also more complete. The British ruled a quarter of the world's territory. The dollar rules all of it. And the foundation, the moment when this became possible, was World War I. The moment Europe ran out of gold. The moment European governments became supplicants. The moment Wall Street became indispensable. The moment America stopped being one power among many and became the power that all others depended on. Sir George Paish saw it happening in November 1917, in that dimly lit Treasury office in London, as he studied the classified report that revealed his empire's bankruptcy. He whispered the truth that British politicians could not yet admit. We are no longer financing the Americans. They are financing us. The war would continue for another year. The fighting would rage across France and Belgium and a dozen other fronts. Millions more would die. Governments would fall. Maps would be redrawn. But the essential transfer of power was already complete. The British Empire was finished as the center of global finance. The American Empire had begun. It happened in ledgers, not on battlefields. It happened in banks, not in trenches. It happened through loans and interest payments and the quiet, relentless logic of debt. The soldiers never saw it. The generals never understood it. The politicians recognized it too late. But the bankers knew. The bankers always knew. They knew that modern empires are built not with armies, but with credit. They knew that the true victors of World War I would not be determined by battlefield casualties, but by balance sheets. They knew that when the war ended, the nation with the gold and the credit and the industrial capacity would inherit the earth. That nation was America. The war that killed millions created an empire. The devastation that destroyed Europe enriched America. The loans that saved the Allies subordinated them. This was not the intended consequence. This was not what anyone planned. But it was the inevitable result of the arithmetic of war. Europe could not afford to fight, and America could afford to lend. The modern American empire, with all its military bases and trade agreements and currency arrangements and diplomatic influence, was not born in 1945 when America defeated fascism. It was born in 1917 when Britain admitted it was bankrupt. Everything after was confirmation. Everything after was the inevitable unfolding of power relationships established when European treasuries opened their books to Wall Street bankers and discovered they had nothing left to bargain with except their future. The greatest transfer of power in modern history happened in 4 years, in private meetings, in loan documents, in gold shipments crossing the Atlantic under armed guard. It happened while the world watched the trenches. It happened while historians recorded the battles. It happened while the dying soldiers thought they were fighting for king and country and civilization. They were fighting. That is true. But the war they were fighting was not the war that mattered. The war that mattered was being waged in London and New York, in the Bank of England and J.P. Morgan and Company, between treasuries and creditors, between the old empire running out of gold and the new empire accumulating it. And the new empire won, not through courage or sacrifice or superior strategy, through patient accumulation of debt claims, through the cold logic of balance sheets, through the willingness to lend when others were desperate and to collect when others were weak. This is how empires are actually built, not through glory, but through leverage, not through conquest, but through credit, not through the courage of soldiers, but through the calculations of bankers. World War I did not create American power through battlefield victory. World War I created American power through European bankruptcy. The battles were the spectacle, the loans were the substance, and in the end, the substance mattered more than the spectacle, because power flows not from territory controlled, but from debts owed. Sir George Paish understood this in 1917. Wall Street understood it in 1914. History would understand it much later. But the mechanism was always clear. He who holds the gold makes the rules. And after World War I, America held the gold, all of it, forever.